Let's do a little recovery yoga to help loosen up our low backs and our hips. Hi, welcome to Wealthy Boss. My name is Mariah. I teach barre, yoga, and Pilates. Go ahead and hit that subscribe channel if you love that type of workout. But if you're a bit on the active side to begin with, then you probably are no stranger to pain or tightness or tension in the low back and hips. I'm sorry if you're feeling that. It can be a drag, but we're gonna do something about it. So we have a beautiful yoga practice today. We'll start a little bit more dynamically and then move down onto the mat for some really feel-good stretches. You will need 2 yoga blocks, so I'm gonna meet you on the mat facing forward. Okay, so we're gonna be starting with 1 block on the mat in front of you, and we're gonna come right away into a wide leg forward fold. So taking the heels a little bit wider than the toes are slightly turned in. And even if you have the flexibility, I would like you to have your hands on a block, so either the lower level or medium level or high level if you need. We're gonna start with just a nice little bend of the knees and then stretch. Kind of a bend and stretch. So you're probably gonna feel a little bit right outside the shins to begin. So we're gonna kind of start with this interior rotation. A couple more. As you find your deep ujjayi breath, inhale and exhale. And then gently turn those toes out. So maybe even tick-tock the heels in just a little bit so that you can still bend into the knees and straighten. So this one you should be feeling a little bit more in the hips, inner thighs, hamstrings. Maybe coordinating with your breath, taking an inhale through the nose, exhale through the nose as well. A couple more like that, please. Perfect. Now we're gonna keep both hands down onto that block and just tick-tock without bending your knees. Tick-tock both of your hips over towards the right. A nice little stretch along the right hip, as well as the inner hip of the left leg. And then go ahead and switch. So we're just shifting the hips. The legs are not moving, knees are not moving. Getting into those hips back and forth. It should feel nice. Taking the right hand, now we're going to center those hips again. Taking the right hand directly into the center of the block now. Take the left hand, reach it up. Now notice how the hips probably traveled with you. We want to stretch now into the low back. So what we're going to do is kind of shift the hips back towards the center. You'll probably feel that, especially if you're a little bit tight like I tend to be here in your QL muscle. But do just your best to kind of get the tailbone towards the center. Neck is relaxed, or if it's comfortable, you can look up towards the top thumb. That's not comfortable for me today, so I'm going to leave that gaze straight forward. Nice deep inhales and exhales here. Next exhale, hand comes down. And we'll take that to the other side. So watch how the hip wants to travel with you, but then can you slide it back towards the middle? In fact, I just heard a teeny tiny little pop in my back. That may happen for you. Filling the lungs with air. One more breath here. That out breath brings your hand down. We're going to place that block aside, keeping the toes wide. I want you to walk both hands over towards the right as you bend deeply into that right leg. Now that right elbow hooks inside. We're going to relieve some of the pressure of that right knee by kind of leaning the elbow into it. As we sink down into the hip, maybe letting those left toes fly up to the ceiling. And we're just gonna walk our hands over to get to the other side. So we straighten into that leg. And then again, it's important that we press the elbow in to relieve any pressure on the knee. We're also helping to externally rotate that hip. And then just back and forth. So as we straighten the legs, hands start to walk over, toes find the sky, lean that elbow in towards the inner edge of that calf and inside of the shin. And here we go, side 2. Just uncovering and unwinding from all the hard work we do. One more time, please, each direction. Continue to take those deep, steady breaths through the nose. Perfect. Now I want you to actually rotate forward. I'm going to have you take both of your blocks, so grab a block or 2, and then place them on the short edge of your mat. You're gonna step the left foot back, right foot forward. We're gonna take the hands on the blocks lengthwise. So I don't have a huge space between my front foot and my back foot. This is our pyramid pose, but I want enough because what we're doing is we're gonna be going from this pose into our hip stretch, and we don't want that back foot so far forward that we push that front knee forward. So just kind of a short pyramid, if you will. And we're gonna roll the shoulders back already as we start to press in through the inner arches, especially that back foot. We start to feel a little bit on the outside of that right hip for extra tight. And then go ahead and drop it down, flip up into your hip stretch. Taking it up. Come high. Beautiful. Now you can experiment if you feel like it feels nicer to have your foot back a little wider so that you can get deeper into that hip stretch. That might feel nicer, but just make sure that that also feels okay when your legs are straight. So we're flowing, we're keeping this dynamic, and then we'll get into some of the more static stretches later. As you press back into the pyramid pose, pull that right hip back, pull the belly in, shoulders back, beautiful. And you can keep those back toes flexed. You're ready to move through from one pose to the other. Let's do one more. Blocks. We're going to find that on the other side. So go ahead and press yourself up into a low runner's lunge, and then just go ahead and step that foot in forward. You can take this a couple of steps to get there, that's okay. Back foot reaches back. Same thing, side two. Now notice if your hip is kind of flaring out to the side, please send it back, lengthen the tailbone behind you. Find that perfect pose, really drop the left hip back, and then sink the knee down. Pressing it up into your hip stretch feels so good on the hips, which can also hold a lot of stress and tension, causing low back pain. So hip pain and back pain are very interrelated. Exhale, take it into your pyramid pose. And last one each side. Back. Nice. And then go ahead and place both hands on the blocks. We're going to step through, and then we're going to come all the way up into our vinyasa. So just setting those blocks aside now, we're going to come all the way up to the very top of our mat, taking a couple of sun salutations to really warm the spine up. So draw the fingertips up, lengthening the tailbone. Exhale, swan dive forward. Drop for a moment. Inhale, hands find the shins. Take your spine long. So you're really pressing into the shins. Hands come down. Let's just step back one foot at a time. Knees can come down, or if you want just that touch of core stability, you can hover around, squeezing the elbows in. And then press it up into upward facing dog. Broaden the collarbones. Lift your heart. Notice how that feels in the low back. So good. Lingering here, another breath. Your next exhale rises those hips high towards the ceiling. Lean those heels towards the mat. Press the hips up to the sky, lengthening your tailbone. Perfect. We're going to bend into the knees. Look between the hands and walk the feet one at a time between. Again, hands find the shin for that nice half back transition. Exhale, fold forward. You can bend into your knees. For low back pain, we don't want to stay in forward folds too long if it's causing discomfort. Inhale, straighten the legs, sweep it up. Press the hip bones forward this time, find a little extension, a little back bend. And then exhale, glide it down, hands come to the mat, stepping back one foot, then the other. Now squeeze those elbows in, lower down to the mat. Inhale, find your upward dog. 2 breaths here, because that release on the low back is so good. Big breath in. Exhale, rolling onto the balls of the feet. Hips come high. Then we're actually going to go right back into that plank pose. Go ahead and take your knees down to the mat for me. Lower all the way down, and we're going to move into our mat series. Okay, so we're probably my block so you can see a little bit better. So we're just gonna kind of play with a dynamic lifting up into our cobra. So I want the hands to be just about mat width distance, maybe even off the mat. They can be a little bit higher. We're gonna point our toes and get just a little bit firm in the quads. Go ahead and press out to your comfort level. Now, of course, we don't want to compress the low back. We want to think really about lifting the chest as opposed to sinking into the shoulders or compressing the back. So we're kind of thinking about lifting up with the heart and then just kind of snake forward. So we want this to almost be like an ocean wave where we lift up and then think about segmenting on the exhale down. Then inhale, think about lifting up like an ocean wave. Head comes up, exhale down. This time, go ahead and stay down. Forehead comes to the mat. You're going to reach around. See if you can find that outside edge of that foot. Go ahead and bend the knee and start to pull the heel in towards the seat. At the same time, I want you to get just a little bit firm with that quad, like you're trying to press the hand away through the top of the foot. There's a little glute stretch here, a little quad stretch here as you take the heel towards the glute. Good, again, firming up in the quad. Maybe see if you can pull it a little bit closer. Gently release that, top of the foot to the mat. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So reach that opposite hand around, see if you can find the outer edge, and then straighten those shoulders again, get a little pull. Lengthening the knee away from you, as though that quad is resisting. It's a good time to find your ujjayi breath again, in and out through the nose. Audible, oceanic breath, filling the body with lightness, with mobility, with fluidity. Good, gently releasing hold of that. Perfect. Now, if you happen to be on carpet, you do not have to move. If you're on a hard floor, I'm going to reposition with you so that we're coming wide. We just want to have a little bit of cushion underneath our knees as we come into frog pose. So I'm going to demonstrate a little bit at an angle for you. For frog pose, we're going to come as wide with our knees into a little bit of a mini, almost a mini split, like a short split, as is comfortable, but we're not yet going to extend the legs. So just kind of play a little bit with seeing how wide the hips will allow your knees to come without dropping straight into the splits, please. And then once you're there, the heels or the feet are going to come wider than the knees. So a nice little frog pose. If you need to have a block underneath you for your hands or to support your forearms on it, that's great. If you want to go a little deeper, come onto your elbows, and then here's the moment of truth. Start to play with pressing the hips back. Even a quarter inch can make an enormous difference here. Releasing into those hips. And we're going to stay here for a little while, so see if we can make friends with this pose. Noticing if the muscles are gripping or contracting, seeing if you can just residually, little bit by bit, release into no effort. Every exhale, seeing if you can become more light in the hips. You can let go of any contracting of the muscles. You can try sending that hips further back in space if it's okay, if it's ready for more. Press up, and then if you were not already facing wide to your mat, we're going to go ahead and do that now. So facing the long edge of your mat, we're going to come into kind of a half lotus position, so your right knee is bent, the left leg is long. I'd like you to go ahead and grab your block, or even depending on how tight you are, you might want to have two nearby. You're going to take the block and place it. I'm going to suggest having the tallest setting first. Place it on the quad, not on the knee. We want to keep the knee happy, but place it right on the quad. And we're going to take then that left elbow onto the block and use it as a little headrest to kind of support. The heel of the hand goes into the temple, and then the top hand comes overhead. Now this is quite accessible for you and you want a deeper stretch. We're going for a nice deep stretch on the lateral right side. So if you're like, I'm not feeling so much, go ahead and drop it down a notch, or depending on kind of your anatomy, it might feel more comfortable to have that block on the shin. Now wherever you are, we want to really think about lifting the chest. So if you feel like you can get further, but you're having to sacrifice and kind of rotate the heart forward, not worth it. Where we want to feel it is really right here. And it's kind of the lift of the shoulder that gives us the length, that kind of counter stretch across that crest of the hip. Nice deep breaths here. Thinking about lengthening that right hip bone down towards the mat to create more space and freedom around that waist. Now, I've personally found for me that the more that I stretch my side body and kind of everything just over the hip joint, or the outside of the hip joint, that tends to free up my low back pain immensely. Of course, everyone's a little bit different, but it's one of those sneaky things that we don't really think about stretching, or that could be related to back pain, but the back is so complex, right? Let's return to that breath. Perfect. Take your time coming up from this one. That can be a little bit intense. Perfect. And so you see right now our hips are kind of open, facing forward. What we're going to do is we're just going to rotate, lead with the chest, rotate, but we're going to keep that knee bent so that the hips are now facing the long edge of your mat. So you're kind of taking that right hip and then angling it now towards your left big toe. From here, I do want you to have a block. We want to be really careful, as I mentioned earlier, with forward folds if we have a lot of low back tension. So I don't like a lot of forward folding where the head is not supported. That puts a lot of strain on the low back. Even though we feel it stretching, it's actually having to contract as well, which is not really great. In fact, I hurt myself once doing that at a yoga practice and ended up in the hospital, so we don't want that. So if we are going to be doing forward folds, I like to see them supported by a block underneath the forehead. That's going to help keep the spine long, but more importantly, keep the weight, kind of like protect and support the weight of the spine so we're not having to contract in the low back. Kind of rotating, you want to think about taking that right hip towards the left front toe. You should be feeling it again in this outer hip of the knee that's bent. If you do feel like you have more flexibility, you can take the forehead down lower, but only if you're not rounding the spine, please, or if it's causing any type of irritation on the opposite side. So if it's causing it on the left side for you, I'm going to come up a little bit. Breathing into it. Every time you inhale, notice any tightness or tension, just kind of right over that hip bone and breathe into it, finding more length. Good, next exhale, hands come right underneath you. Go ahead and peel yourself up, and we'll try both those things on the other side. So over chest and out block. So again, I'm going to kind of open my hips facing forward again, so come face towards me. And then this leg is going to extend. Opposite knee comes in, just as open as feels comfortable for you. That block then again comes, depending on how long your legs and torso are, it can either be to the quad or to the shin. Mine's going to be on my quad. That right elbow now presses in, and then hands to head. If that feels like, oh, I'm not getting much of a stretch, you can come down to that lower setting. And the most important thing here again is not how low you get into the lean, but how square on your top shoulder is towards me. Lengthening left hip bone in towards the mat so you feel like you just grew about a 1/2 inch over the side of the hip. So excited to hear if this stretch in particular maybe makes a difference for you, because again, it's one of the things we don't really think about stretching is the side of the body. If you notice that you're starting to tilt forward, see if you can just lift that elbow up and almost even back. Exhale, pressing yourself up, and then again, this time you're going to square off on the other short edge of your mat. So legs kind of maintain the same shape. We're just kind of spiraling hips around so that that left hip now is angling towards that right big toe. Block comes out again, this time probably on the shin. You can kind of use your hands to help rotate you for a little bit more towards the line of that left big toe. And then again, thinking about lengthening the hip away. Why I like this as opposed to both legs being forward, especially if you have low back tension, is rather than placing the stretch in the low back or hamstrings, we're actually really using that knee as an anchor to find the length over the hip. So you get a very different stretch, and one that I personally feel is a lot safer and more effective for low back pain. Again, notice if you're starting to kind of veer out at a diagonal, kind of square those shoulders off towards your block. Find your deep, silky, smooth breath. Unlocking your body's innate inner healing abilities. Lengthening the tailbone away from you, draw your knees into the chest. We'll stay here a few moments. This one is so simple, but it is still so powerful. I like to continue to include it even though you may already know it. Continuing to find more space between the vertebrae by sending the tailbone to that far edge of your mat. Hug your knees in opposition. Feel your ribs expanding with every inhale into the tops of the thighs. Hips to fall open to the side in a little kind of half happy baby, modified happy baby. Gently rocking side to side if that feels good. You're getting out any pops in those hips. Okay, closing the knees again. Let's return one foot at a time to the mat. Let's take the feet about mat width distance. Let the knees knock in. This is where we're going to take our Shavasana today. Pressure on that low back. Hands come wide, big palms face up. Find yourself sinking into the mat as you become more and more motionless. The lungs rise up with air. Exhale, let the tissues melt. arms out overhead. Gently falling over towards the side. Picking yourself back up. And thank you for joining me for this special practice today. Hope you feel a little bit better. Namaste. I sure hope you're feeling a little bit better. Please let me know in the comments below if that's the case. And we did today some focusing on stretching and lengthening for the spine and hips, but if you struggle with low back pain, that's really just kind of one of what I consider to be 3 foundational concepts, drawing from my experience in yoga and Pilates, from research, from working with other clients, as well as using myself as a guinea pig. And I'd love to share a little bit more about that if low back pain is a little bit of a chronic issue for you. So I do have a free download. I would love for you to download my free Back Bliss ebook. That is 3 yoga and Pilates essentials for loving your low back. I think they're gonna help a lot. So will link to that in the description below. And I can't wait to hear how this practice was for you. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next week.